President and Vice President of the European Investment Bank, distinguished guests, dear students and colleagues. I would like to welcome Mr. Werner Hoyer, President of the European Investment Bank, to the University of Cyprus. Mr. Hoyer, your presence here today provides our students with the opportunity to discuss directly with you the role of the European Investment Bank in the current and future challenges of the EU and its member states. Taking this opportunity, I would like to express our appreciation to EIB for financing in 2002 our vision to build the city of knowledge, our current university campus. We are pleased to have with us today a convinced European that has been involved in European affairs at the highest level for the last 20 years. Mr. Hoyer serves as President of EIB and Chairman of its Board of Directors since the 1st of January 2012. Mr. Hoyer and colleagues, I would like to thank you once again for being with us today and for financing a part of the university campus and casting our own beliefs that the university has to play a crucial role for the recovery of the Cyprus economy. Dear students, Mr. Hoyer is at your disposal for a fruitful discussion, so please feel free to express your concerns and questions. Actually, we have a lot of time. It's true. And so thank you to be here today, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, dear colleagues, dear students. Please.
Thank you so much for this very, very kind introduction and for the invitation to the university. It is an honor and pleasure to be here. It is always an honor and pleasure to go to university and discuss with students and faculty. But in this case, I'm particularly moved because we have been, as the EU Bank, modest part of the financing of this institution, or parts of it, and at the same time, I'm moved by the quality of the infrastructure which I can see here, the quality of the faculties I've been informed about, and the high ambition that this university is having in terms of its international recognition as a top-class European university. It is a wonderful opportunity also for my friend Michael Tanasescu, the Vice President of the Bank, who is doing the business in this part of Europe, in particular also in Greece and Cyprus, and who beyond that is responsible for our energy activities, to explain to you, together with him, the EIB, the EU Bank. That's a very strange animal. I always say one of the last undetected treasures of the European integration process. And you can forget all the prejudices you might cultivate vis-à-vis banks. It's a very different kind of bank because it was and is a part of the European treaties, part of the EU treaty. It was founded in the context of the treaties of Rome in the 50s. And since then it is part of the EU treaty, also now in the Treaty of Lisbon, the current EU treaty. And it was erected in the 50s in order to set up a bank owned by the member states of the then beginning member states of the European Economic Community, which only had 6 members. And these 6 members thought, when we establish the European Economic Community, when we want to establish a common market, when we want to organize free movement of labor, free movement of capital, free movement of goods and services, then we must have in this war-stricken continent of Europe an institution that is able to provide long-term financing for the necessary infrastructure. Because you can imagine 1958, when the bank finally was beginning, the infrastructure situation in Europe was disastrous. The continent had just been destroyed by an awful war. At that time, some parts of Europe had moved ahead because they had been the main beneficiary of the so-called Marshall Plan after World War II, and other parts of Europe had been very less lucky and did not benefit as much from the Marshall Plan as others. So the idea was to set up an institution that serves particularly needs of those parts of the European economic community that now is the European Union that had the worst end of the tide. So this was the beginning of the European Investment Bank. It was a very small institution at that time, located in Brussels. 10 years later it moved to Luxembourg, and since then it grew to unknown dimensions. Still, it has been growing in the secrecy or the woods, let's say, of Luxembourg without getting many attention from the people in Europe or even the politicians in Europe. Far behind the mountains in the woods, this bank then grew to be by far biggest multilateral bank in the world. It is the bank that is about 2.5 times the size of the World Bank, and together all the other multilateral development banks are smaller than the European Investment Bank itself. I don't say that because I'm so proud of being the head of such a huge organization, or we have so much funds available or whatever. I say it because it's an instrument of EU policy. That's what counts. Our owners are now the 28 member states of the European Union. By the way, not the Commission of the European Union, but the member states of the European Union. And with a volume and balance sheet of more than 500 billion euros, and an annual lending volume of something like 70 to 75 billion euros, we are instruments in the hands of the European leaders. Our Board of Governors is composed of the finance ministers of the European Union member states, and the most important body I report to is ECOFIN, the Finance Ministers' Council, of course, but then the European Council. So the heads of state and government is the body I have to report to regularly. And they use this instrument now more and more, and this is why we must come out of the woods and tell the story about the bank, because now in the crisis of Europe, we have a mission to fulfill. In 2007, when the whole crisis began, the bank was asked to do more to provide for growth and jobs in Europe at the beginning of the crisis. The bank did an unusual effort at that time to bring investment into the economy and produce jobs and growth. And then in 2010, when the first crisis was followed by the second one, the bank had to increase the business volume again, so the member state had to raise the capital of the bank. Now the capital of the bank is an interesting thing, because whenever I say we lend money for the purposes of growth and employment in Europe, innovation and small and medium-sized industries, then people think that we are sending EU money to the University of Cyprus or to Vasilikos when the power plant blew up and things like that. No, we are not sending taxpayers' money. We go to the international capital markets and raise money by bond issue. We sell bonds this year, hopefully, knock on wood, at 75 billion euros on the international capital markets. Roughly half in Europe, half outside of Europe. And with that money raised in the capital markets, we then are able to finance the projects we have all over Europe and beyond. 10% of our business goes to non-European countries in the Mediterranean neighborhood, in the Eastern European neighborhood, but also in Sub-Saharan Africa, Caribbean, Pacific, Asia, and Latin America. So how can we raise so much money in the capital markets? Well, because the member states of the European Union are backing the activities of the bank. They're backing the activities of the bank by giving the basic capital for the bank, which is on the balance sheet 232 billion euros, now 242 billion euros, but only 22 billion of these 240 something have been paid in. The rest is callable capital. In addition to that, the bank has put some reserves into the coffer so that we are very well financed, soundly financed bank. Now the activities of the banks for the last couple of years have been very much expanded in view of the economic crisis. From 2012 to 2013, in view of a capital injection of the member states, we were able to go to the markets and raise more money. So that brings us to the 75 billion this year. And with that, we finance projects in 4 big areas. Number one is the classical area, infrastructure in Europe, the purpose for which the bank was founded 55 years ago. This is still today ports, it is LNG terminals, it is
engineering schools.
No, I'm coming to that issue. Not engineering schools. In particular, not engineering schools, Professor. That's for sure. But on the infrastructure side, for instance, we invested to, let's say, the digital infrastructure of Europe. This is the freeways of today. 40 years ago, 10 years ago, we financed mainly freeways and roads. In Cyprus here, it would take a little bit more time to get to Limassol from here without the EIB financed roads. But nowadays, the roads of today are the roads of information technology, so broadband infrastructure in Europe. This is one of the key things now in that infrastructure field. The second big field where we are active nowadays, and nobody would have thought about that in 1958, is energy efficiency, fight against climate change, and all these things. Climate action, as we say, that part of our business. Roughly 17 billion euros in lending to activities, to projects, which serve the purpose of better use of energy and of mitigating the effects of climate change. The third big area is something nobody would have thought about in 1958 either, that's small and medium-sized companies. Well, small and medium-sized companies are supposed to be financed by their local banking partners. They're supposed to be financed by Hellenic Bank or Bank of Cyprus or corporate central bank or whoever. The problem is they don't get the money. If you are a small entrepreneur and have a good business idea or a small store or a craftsman shop or whatever, and you need some money in order to finance a delivery car for your thing, you have difficulty getting it. If you get it, then you get it at very high interest rates, so that you have the feeling to be a victim of a cutthroat attack. So this is why it is necessary that public banks, banks who serve a public purpose, help the banks nowadays to lend money to the final recipients, because the banks are, sometimes they are to be blamed, but normally they simply have problems because they are forced to deleverage and to reduce their risk. So we are there in order to help banks to finance SMEs and mid-caps. Mid-caps are a specific problem to medium-sized companies because they are sometimes too small for the international capital markets. They would only trigger a laugh if they try to get an international bond issue, but they are too big for the local corporate bank, for instance. So this is why it is particularly important for as a backbone for Europe's industry to finance these things. Now the fourth big thing, and now comes the consolation, Professor, is an area that is going to determine about Europe's future. And we invest something like 70 billion into that per year as well. The knowledge economy. The knowledge economy is so important because once we are out of the deepest depth of the crisis, we will find out that there is life after the crisis. And for that life, Europe is not well prepared. We have an investment gap in Europe continuously for 10 years. The investment figures in Europe, overall, aggregated for the entire European Union, are 15% below the level of 2007, consecutively for the last 7 years. So can you imagine what that means for the quality of the capital stock? And some people say some part of Europe's infrastructure in industry is rusting away. So 7 years of completely insufficient reinvestment and new investment. In addition to that, we see that, and this has something to do with globalization at the core of it, Europe is trailing behind the United States, Japan and Korea and other places in innovation expenses at least, for 10 consecutive years. The Koreans, South Korea I mean,
yeah. Okay.
They spend about 3.4% of their national GDP for the knowledge economy. and to innovation. The US is at something like 2.9, Japan 3.2, the European Union, the average of the European Union, 1.9, and don't go into the details and see what does that mean.
And here, 0.4.
And here, 0.4. And Greece is not much better, and Poland is not much better, and the Czech Republic is just catching up. And I don't blame anybody, but I want to raise the awareness among the members of the European Council every time I go there. Say, the hour of truth will come when we are out of the crisis, because then we will see how others have paved the way for an advantage in the international competition. And this is why it is high time to think about innovation and increased activities in this field. This is why we have identified innovative activities of corporates, of SMEs, but also of the public sector, including public universities and public vocational training, publicly organized vocational training, and things like that, as one of the key areas where we want to invest in the future. And this is relevant here, and this is why we want to be part of this university also in the future, including the engineering school.
Thank you very much. Vice President, do you want to add something?
It's so difficult to say more after Werner's speech. I will try to tell you that coming here is so refreshing, seeing so young faces, and I remember that 40 years ago I was exactly in the same position, sitting at this side. But I think that the main question, I think from you, it's why these guys are coming here. And I'm very proud to tell you that today we reported to media, to your officials, to your people actually, what the European Investment Bank did in 2013 for Cyprus and what we intend to do for the next years. And I think that you have to know that today our exposure to your country it's more than 3 billion euro. 3 billion euro represent around 14–15% of GDP, with the highest exposure ever to among member states. So we have to take care of our money. So we have to see how this money will be spent, and we have to know exactly if they are very well spent. And I learned today, coming here, that part of them, which was this splendid university, were very well spent. And I'm very confident, guys, that investing more in this kind of venues, encourage people like you to stay here in the country, to trust this country, to trust the values of this country. It's the best way to increase the added value of Cyprus around Europe and around the world. And I'm very confident that your generation is not a lost generation. Your generation, I think, is the future of the Europe and the future of the country. Thank you.
Let's go to the questions. Please.
We're also ready for dirty comments.
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Go ahead.
So, please, from the Department of European Studies, if I remember well.
Modern language.
Ah, you see, I remember
Modern language.
Modern language.
Fabian, come also.
Thanks for coming here today. I would like to ask you, in your opinion, which sectors will present growth perspective the next year in Cyprus, creating new job positions?
This is difficult for us to give an answer to, because you have an immediate problem that needs to be resolved or as quickly as possible, let's say a short-term fix that has to do with bringing jobs to people as soon as possible, and then you have to think about the medium and long-term situation. Cyprus has obviously not many or not any huge companies that would be manufacturing champions on the global scale. So this will certainly not happen in the next years or even decades. So where are the strengths? The strengths in Cyprus are probably beyond the classical things like tourism and logistics everybody's talking about, are areas in which small and medium-sized companies are developing highest ambitions. And that is the link to what is happening here. When we walked through the optical lab today, we saw that this is an institute that obviously has the world level as the level of ambition. So this is then something that would enable a spin-off of such a university or school to develop into a company that might play a role on the world scale. I would say, therefore, that it is difficult to say where, for instance, a university like this might have spin-offs into directions which might have to do with, in this case, with optics or with information technology or with nanotechnology or whatever. So since we are talking about medium and small companies, I would not be able to identify. But when the European Council, to put it in another picture, last week said, and that was a remarkable progress from my point of view, that Europe should think about reindustrialization, taking into account that Europe has lost too many jobs in manufacturing in the last decades. And some countries, some big countries, had given up on manufacturing. Then I would warn against the misinterpretation of that. It does not mean return to an artificial support to industries which would be dying anyway. It means investing into fields where research and technology teach us that there are potential in the future. And I just mentioned a couple of them, like ICT or nanotechnologies or optics and many other things which have to do with sciences, including natural sciences, including medical sciences, including biosciences in general. And therefore, I'm a little bit worried about the curiosity we trigger among young people when it comes to these fields or to natural sciences and engineering in general. In my country, which it used to be a hub of engineering and manufacturing, and for instance, tool machinery on the world-class level, an astonishing low number of high school students consider an engineering or science university degree. This is disturbing. And when we were tasked by the European Council last year to take a responsibility in the fight against youth unemployment, we identified very, very quickly what was one of the big problems with youth unemployment. That is the mismatch between qualifications and job and labor market needs. You have of course you have many young people who don't have any training, any vocational training, and bad time to finding a qualified job. That's one thing that exists, and we have to work on it by investing into vocational training, by offering small companies support when they employ a young person, give him or her a training on the job. That's fine. But the other problem is that we have highly qualified young people who have fantastic university degrees, but unfortunately the labor market is not interested in that degree. So a little bit more thinking about what directions should one go in terms of triggering curiosity among young students. When I go to the high school where my kids presently go, 14 and 15 years old, I'm horrified by the deterrent effect their classes in science and math have on their interest for a place in the university. They are not attracted to these fields, which definitely have a future. They are deterred. And so I'm wondering whether we should do a little bit more to encourage people to go into fields that might have a chance in the future. I'm sorry, I cannot answer your question better. I cannot identify what kind of specific industries are the ones that are best for Cyprus. But I trust on the creativity and the vision of those who undergo, let's say, the creativity tests of this country, of this university, of this society, and they will find out themselves. And then you must have an environment in which something like this is supported.
To complement what Werner said, I will be very specific to your question. I learned from the finance minister today, so why I'm able to tell you and to answer to your question. So actually next year, which will be a positive year from the economic point of view, which is very good, the main driver will be tourism and services. This is the positive side. However, in the negative side, unfortunately, the sector which needs loans, or the sector which needs credit, will not create added value in this country yet. Because the banking sector here in Cyprus is not yet fully restructured. And because of the huge bulk of these bad loans, it's called NPLs, non-performing loans, the banks are not a good appetite, to lend money. Why we are here today? Actually, today we signed 25 million with the CCB, Cooperative Central Bank. We lend them money to be able to lend to small and medium-sized enterprises, this money to go to the real economy, to benefit young people. And a very important component of this loan, it's dedicated to you guys, to employ young people. And for that, the bank is able to do more, to create more advantages for these companies who will hire people like you. So this is our role, to encourage, to hire more young people. So this will be the main driver for 2015, but in the next years will be a more balanced approach, and I think that Cyprus will grow through two main drivers. Sure, sector of tourism and services remain #1, but small and medium-sized enterprises and big infrastructure and energy projects will be other drivers for economic growth. Thank you.
Actually, you have to turn to our minister a few times that when a colleague of mine brings 1 million euros, for example, in European grants, from European funds, they need to bring 1,000 tourists to bring this 1 million euros. Tourist industry is very important, but innovation, I think, today is much more.
It's key.
And in this country, there is no tradition of innovation, and this is what we have to change. And it's good that people like you come to Cyprus and tell to our officials this new story of the economy, because we need some other people from abroad to tell them the new stories. It is very important for us. So, other questions? Let's start from this ladies first. Yes, please.
Department of Economics.
Okay.
Thank you for being here today. Since the EIB provides loans for other continents except for Europe and in a variety of sectors, including health, what is the possibility of getting education loan many times? Is there a priority according to the sector which is needed to be enhanced? It is considered more important to help countries which did not receive funding so far. How the significance of a loan is measured? Thank you.
We don't think in terms of quota for countries, for instance. This is clear. If, Vice President Anastasios went a little bit too far today when saying we have no limits. we have limits, of course. Can finance everything, but the problem in Europe, and I'll come out of Europe in a minute, the problem is not necessarily the availability of funds. The problem is the availability of good projects, because as I said in my introduction, everything we finance, we must justify vis-à-vis our investors. And that means also the rating agencies. So this is why for us it is key to have a clear AAA rating. And that is tested by the markets every day. And that is why in some parts of Europe we have real problems finding bankable projects. So this is one thing. Second thing is, of course, we have a couple of criteria that we must apply. Number one, it is not our job to crowd out commercial banks. If financing can be done by commercial banks, fine, then the public bank is not needed. When it comes, however, to long-term financing, then you will see that the commercial banks need not be crowded out, they disappear voluntarily because they believe it's too risky for them. So when it comes to long-term financing, we are needed. And this is the case in strategic areas. For instance, we just financed a rail connection between Vienna and Salzburg for 45 years. This is a financing horizon that the commercial bank cannot do, at least not as the main contributor. So this is where we go into, and this is why our bosses at the European Council say public infrastructure like rail is a good thing. Also when it comes to cargo, with the purpose of getting trucks from the roads and onto rail instead. This is why information technology grids are important. This is why energy transmission grids are important. This is one thing. And I talked about the other things like innovation and knowledge economy and so forth. Outside the European Union, we have only very limited resources. We lend something like 7.5 to 8 billion euros outside the European Union per year. That sounds little in comparison to what we do inside the European Union. As a matter of fact, it's 10%. But we are still, with that 7.5 billion, the fourth largest multilateral development bank. As development bank, only the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank are bigger than we are. So we have to focus these limited amounts. And we have to lend the money according to the mandates which the European Union gives us. You know, the business model of the bank, I talked about the funding side, getting money from the capital market and bringing it to the final recipient at very reasonable, advantageous interest rates, depends on the fact that we combine the loans of the bank, credit, with the grants given by the European Union in terms of structural funds here in Cyprus, for instance, or when it comes to the university, in research funds, things like that. And we connect to it technical advice. In our bank, I sometimes have the feeling around me, I see more engineers and natural scientists than classical bankers, because we are strong in advising people how to use a loan. And this is very important for the so-called third world. When you want to establish a very good project in a field where we have a specific mandate, energy efficiency, then you need to bring the loan, the EU support, and the technical advice together. And so we have a couple of areas where we are particularly active, like fight against climate change and therefore energy efficiency. In addition to that, we do a lot in areas where we believe that we serve the strategic interests of the European Union by financing or co-financing projects which are in our interests. Like, take a very drastic example. We finance, for instance, a considerable part of the extension of the Panama Canal. Because the Panama Canal is going to change the logistical links between Asia, East Asia in particular, and not only the east coast of the United States, but also all of Europe. The seaways will change for transport for European companies. It's extremely important. So this is the reason why we finance something like this as well. So, to put it in other words, if we finance things with our limited means outside the European Union, then it must fit under one of the headings or headlines of the European Union priorities, in particular energy efficiency, energy security, environment. These are the main areas where we are active, and we cannot finance everything.
Other questions? Please.
Hello, from the
microphone.
from the Department of Public and Business Administration. Firstly, I would like to thank you for being here to listen to us, and I have to say I really appreciate your organization's efforts to help the whole of Europe. However, I'll be frank with you, I don't feel that optimistic about the future of Europe or of Cyprus. Firstly, starting from Cyprus, I see that we have a high growth of unemployment. At the same time, we have non-performing loans, which both contribute to a vicious cycle, which ultimately makes people want to leave Cyprus and the European Union in general. So, acknowledging the fact that we want to keep innovation in Europe, and we want people that are bright and can contribute to innovation and knowledge, and we don't seem to be doing enough, and that's a concern I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
To be put in a nutshell, that's the share I share with you. This is why I raise the flag and say we are so drowning, we are so dizzy with crisis management that we do not see anymore where the real priorities are. And of course, when I'm talking to a medium-sized entrepreneur who is just about to drown, then it is little consolation for him when I have a sermon on him concerning innovation. He will say, would you please help me to service my bank loan, which is due next week, that is much more important than innovation. So I can understand that the government is concentrating on this, but beyond that we must think at least the medium, if not the long term.
Here the employment beyond 25 years old is 40%, 41%.
Okay.
Unemployment.
Yeah.
So one out of two of these guys, when they go out, they have a job. They don't have a job.
Yes, this is what I'm completely aware of, and this is why I believe, indeed, we must return to the investment engine in Europe, not just in Cyprus, in Europe as a whole, and we must return to the innovation engine, because it doesn't make sense to say we save an ailing steel mill in the Midlands of the UK for another 5 years, and then it is going to go down forever. Let's face realities, that steel mill will die in a very few years. But there are fields of activity which are popping up here, and for which we must encourage the banks to provide financing again. And that, of course, makes it necessary to deal with the question of non-performing loans. Because the balance sheets of the banks are carrying much too high a burden presently in order to be able to produce new credit and new loans. This is why it takes, for instance, an international multilateral bank who supports local banks with the conditionality that you get that loan, 25 million for a corporate central bank today, only if you can give proof that you have passed on this financial advantage to a final recipient who produces jobs. Now this is one thing of the other thing that has to be dealt with, but not by us, but the governments are having to deal with that, is what do you do with non-performing loans? And this is something that is dealt with in the different member states in the European Union in very different ways. From much more serious efforts to restructure the loans, all the way to bringing bad loans into bad banks. So all these are possibilities. It is not up to us to give advice to the governments of the member states on how to deal with that question, but I think it has to be done. But you know, every day we lose in investing into future-oriented parts of our industry. Costs us dearly in the future. So, as I said to the European Council, please, the world around us is moving, and moving extremely quickly. And if we want to catch up, we will do it right now, and do not wait in all complacency until the crisis is over. It's too late now.
So, one question from Professor Elinas, and then we go with Susan.
Well, thank you for being here. I think that's a great discussion we're having. I think I have a good project for you to finance. Apart from the engineering school, of course, which is a fantastic project. It's a bank. It has about 40% of the lending market, about 25% of the deposit market. And its stabilization would really stabilize the entire economy, give jobs to young people, and really help Cypriot recovery. I know that you probably cannot do that directly, get a stake in a bank. But I'm wondering whether that's something that is being discussed in European financing organizations. I know that you're one of the major shareholders of the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. And I'm wondering whether that's something that is being considered, investing in the Bank of Cyprus, and if not, why?
For us, it's off limits because by the statutes we are kept from financing banks. Although, as a side remark, today we had a very good news because for the first time we made a loan agreement again with the Cypriot bank. That wasn't done for many years since the crisis began. So,
since 2010 is the first one.
Since 2010 is the first thing, and I think there will be follow-up loans because the other banks are going to line up and say if it works with the CDC or the corporate central bank, CCB, then it's going to work with others as well. So the one thing. Second thing is, indeed, we are shareholders of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is beginning to prepare business in Cyprus. I mean, normally Cyprus is not their country of operation, but they are presently in the process of getting board approval for activities in Cyprus, exactly for one of the purposes you described, because they are able, by their statutes, to recapitalize or support new establishing banks. So it might be an opportunity. One has to look at the business model of your bank, how sound it is. So we'll tell the colleagues in London to have a close look at it. The problem is a little bit the London bank is not very big, so don't expect huge volumes. But we are kind of glad that they go also in markets where we operate but cannot finance banks because they can, and this is why we cooperate with them very well.
This side, yes.
Hi, from the Department of Political Science. Thank you for your time and the support you've given to Cyprus so far. As you may be aware, there are ongoing peace talks among the two communities in Cyprus for a long-term solution to the Cyprus problem. And these peace talks involve trust-building initiatives, one of which is the return of the Famagusta town, which is abandoned for 40 years now. Now, if this materializes, huge amounts of money will be needed for the reconstruction of the city. Maybe all the buildings will need to be brought down and rebuilt again. Given the stake, the balance sheet position of the banks that are now in Cyprus and the huge amounts that are going to be involved, is the bank ready to support this initiative?
Let me say, first of all, what I see here in this field is the most encouraging development I've seen here for many, many years, and I've been involved in these talks over many years. I've been a member of the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union for the last 2 decades most of the time. I've cooperated extremely well with Alexander Downing on this issue. I was completely frustrated after the referendum. I was deeply disappointed that nothing came about, although I can understand the reason. And since then I was completely frustrated by the standstill, and now all of a sudden there comes movement. Now I have learned not to dwell on dreams, so I'm cautious, but I must say there are obviously some reasonable people now having reasonable talks with one another again, and that is very encouraging. So if there is a glimpse of hope, then I would immediately take it as an opportunity to think about a potential contribution one day if things materialize. Well, Famagusta is of course a symbol, a huge symbol. But on the other hand, from the economist's point of view, at first glance, a fantastic opportunity, because that place, if the unification dreams materialize, will be the tourism paradise of Europe and the world one day, because the potential is enormous. So one day the international capital community will line up in order to be part of that bonanza. So that's long term. On the way there, if things really run in the cautiously described positive way, you will need public investment, because in order to develop that place, after 40 years of destruction or decay will require installing a functioning sewage system, paving the first couple of decent roads, and all these things which no private investor will be interested in, at least not in the first years or decades. So there, I would see that if things are going into the desired direction, and I still cannot believe, I can only hope it, then of course there would be an issue for the European Union, and I'm quite sure that then the European Union would mandate us to be part of the financing of that exercise. But I hold my breath.
Mr. Hoyer, you know this university is a communal university. The official language of the university is in Greek and Turkish. We are just on the green line. So it's going to be, if there is a union of the country, it's going to be the main instrument to bring young people together and to join the country again. So we have to see also this dimension. Are you from Augusta?
No, I'm from Limassol.
From Limassol. Nobody's perfect.
What do you mean? I'm on my way to Limassol.
Yes, yes.
So let me add one thing. This is a very good example what you just mentioned here. There's another one. When I was in the foreign ministry, I was responsible for the Good Institute, among other things. And here we have one good institute on the line, on the green line.
Yes.
It's been in the middle of town. And when we had to save lots of money and close many good institutes around the world, I insisted that this one remains, because that is accessible from both sides and it's used by people from both sides of the country. Sometimes you need also places of symbolism with which you show that the theory and the legal ambition that we have in the European Union, that the entire island of Cyprus is a member of the European Union, must be underpinned by examples like that.
Yes. No, let's say this. Bonjour.
Bonjour. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir.
Thank you for your presence. It's very important for us because we're young.
Department?
Law.
Law, okay.
We're so far away from the centers that decisions are taking, especially in Brussels. So for us, it's very important when people like you are coming and they want to hear actually our opinion. It's very important for youth. My question is, due to high rates of unemployment in Cyprus, we have put all our hopes on energy sector in Cyprus. So my question is, do you think that investing in Cyprus becoming an energy center is a priority for you, taking into consideration the fact that the US have innovated with shale gas and they want to export large amounts of natural gas, shale gas in Europe? Thank you.
We mobilized NATO and other vessels from the first moment on to bring in auxiliary power units to serve the immediate electricity needs and all that. So I'm familiar with the thing. And when I came to the bank, we had the first priority to conclude all the studies and then the preparations for the reinvestment into the facility costs. So last year, the final disbursement of 130 billion for the power plant took place, and it is run now at full speed again, but not with clean energy. So we had to make a compromise. This power plant is not according to our environmental standards. So for a transition period, in order to secure energy supplies for Cyprus, we said it's okay. But it's a traditional thing. One day that place must be fired with clean gas. So how to get that gas here is now the big story. And maybe we should say a little bit about this. So we are all dwelling again on expectations and sometimes dreams concerning all gas fields and pipelines and LNG terminals.
Again, we discussed this subject many times here with the energy minister and other officials, even today when...
Sorry to have the same discussion again.
No, but I think that the most important issue here is that you raise this key question for the country, for your country. And I'm sure that on long term, on medium-long term, this energy sector will become the most important economic driver of this country. I cannot tell you that it's tomorrow or it's in 1 year, but what I know and I would like to share with you is that it's a huge effort from the authorities to speed up this process. LNG, gas fields, how to connect this pipeline. So it's a huge preoccupation, 24/7, from their part to find solutions, which are not easy. From the technological point of view, it's not easy. But their main preoccupation is to find solutions, and I'm confident that they will find these solutions. And our bank committed even today to be part of this exercise, to be part of this energy project here in Cyprus. So sooner or later, energy will be the most important sector. And again, your country needs diversification, because your economic growth cannot come only from one single sector, tourism or services. Diversification is key, and not only for Cyprus, for many other countries in Europe. So I'm a believer, and I think that energy will become a key sector for your economy.
Looking at one thing, in order to show the problem, which I would see if I were a minister here, or prime minister, to look at this. You have to make a trade-off between security and price. And that's a damn tough choice. Because if you want to close the gap here, you would have to do it with delivery contracts for a relatively long time at a relatively high price with a high degree of security. That can be done. But then you're bound by these contracts for a relatively long time. If then, within a couple of years, you tap gas fields in the vicinity, which would be able to provide gas at much lower prices, then you have a disadvantage. So it's a balancing act a little bit. And I'm aware that, as Michael said, energy is a key priority for the country, both on the energy security and on the area of energy prices, because the problem here is that electricity here is much too expensive. And one of the, if I were a politician here, right, but I would see clearly that I would have to make contribution to both energy security and reduction of energy prices for the individual households who are pretty much cashed off here, and also for businesses who cannot survive if the energy prices start to keep going up.
Do you consider also the connection to the European network, electrical network? I think because there is a project about that.
Yeah, we haven't discussed about that.
No, I wouldn't know about it in detail, because I'm aware that even, let's say, the deep water cable between Cyprus and Israel, which is technically or technologically probably an option, yes, would be feasible, but probably extremely expensive. So in terms of energy prices on the island, I think it would be very difficult. In terms of energy security, of course, quite an option.
Because we pay 6 cents more than you in the kilowatt hour, and we pay at least 12 cents more than you in. So we have the most expensive kilowatt hour in Europe.
Disaster.
Yes.
Department of Political Science.
We get 2 more questions actually. Okay. And after we will watch a small movie about the research of the University of Cyprus, and we will.
Then I'm out for Limassol.
Yeah, and then you.
The best choice.
Yes.
To begin with, I'm not from Famagusta either. I want to thank you for a very optimistic proposition in an era of very pessimistic realities. We have to adjust to the open market, not the opposite. The funds will be helpful for the companies, but will it be beneficial for young people? We nowadays work for less money, and only as long as the funds last. After the funding, will young people still work? Thank you.
Yes, if we produce jobs, and jobs can be produced only by growth. Growth can only be produced with investments, and this is why we need to restart the investment engine. We need to look at the sustainability of our projects and our efforts. It does not make sense to look at the short run only. We have to find projects and developments in business that lead to continuous maintenance of jobs. And then there is a chance. And I believe it is the case. Sometimes you hear the word, well, I see the end of the light, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. And you look a little bit closer to it and you just see that's the train coming the other way. That is not what I see here. I see that this return to growth is very, very, very slow. But the vector is going up again, and this is what counts and will produce then also hope again. One of the problems is, but this is not a separate thing, that is something we have in all countries. The economic indicators which we have access to are showing the positive development much sooner, 1, 2, 3 years sooner than the labor market figures do. And this is the problem here. We have to cope with an unemployment situation which is going to persist only with slight and slow improvements over the next years. I'm sure the situation will improve. Once you leave this university, I think probably the worst is over. But still, it is a very, very challenging situation for the next years. Giving up is not the solution.
Other questions? Please, the last question.
I'm from the Department of European Economics Studies. So my question is a bit similar to what you just said. 2 years ago, you predict that Greece, that is the sickest patient for the economy, will need 1 or 2 decades to recover again. Now, 2 years later, after these big changes and these measures that the Greek government took, are your economic forecasts still the same? Or they have changed to better or worse? And could you share with us your same predicts for Cyprus?
I think I have horrified people 2 years ago when I said the recovery will take 2 decades, or up to 2 decades. Let's be quite sober and realistic. If you lose 5% growth average, year by year by year by year, and you're now at least 25% behind GNP of 2007, at least, then of course it will take more than 5 or 6 or 8 years to compensate for it. It will take, obviously, a decade or more. That does not deter me. What would deter me is if the vector would not show in the right direction, upwards. And this is the case. And this is true for Cyprus. This is true for encouraging developments in the Greek market, where the Greek banks are returning to the capital markets successfully, and sooner or later the Greek state will be able to return to the markets. I would not be surprised if that they had the first success story already this year. So from that point of view, I think the optimism I radiate is not a reflection of my, let's say, my whistling in the woods. It is based on a pretty sound analysis.
I would like to complement a little bit what Werner said, because I'm responsible for Greece too. It's very interesting to see. Usually when I travel to Athens, I'm going to the streets to see people, to talk with them. And what I saw last time, yesterday, was that the mood, it's much better than 3 months ago. The general mood of people on the street. We went to have a small salad with a small bar, and we talked with others. So I think that Greece will recover soon. But at the same time, Greece should learn from the past mistakes. And I think that you here, young generation present here, which probably I don't know, in 10 years, 15 years, will be the future politician of this country. You have to learn from these mistakes and not to repeat it. And I think that now, in the more concrete way, Greece will recover. It's clear that. We'll tap the capital markets, will attract money. It's a huge interest from abroad to the Greek economy, it's clear. The same is here in Cyprus. Cyprus will recover, I think, in the next 18 months. And the main taste for Cyprus is 2016, when the program with Troika will finish. And everybody should find a solution, an exit strategy solution. And even in my discussion with the finance minister today, which is a bright guy, I think that this test, 2016, will be key for your country. And I truly believe that tapping again the capital market, restructuring the banking sector, improving the mood and improving the credit growth here in Cyprus will create more perspective. So my message, don't give up. Don't give up. You have a beautiful country, you have fantastic people here, so you are the future. It's difficult now, I totally agree with you. But I don't like to see among you young people this negative mood. It's difficult now, I totally agree with you. But you have to think what is next. And I assure you, your future will be much, much better than.
Mr. President, you have also a minute to conclude, if you want to add something.
I think that was wonderful. This was the experience of a very experienced finance minister sitting next to me. He knows what he's talking about. So I share that feeling, and if I look at the suffering of the people, I can understand that they are not in bright mood. So there's no question about it. But on the other hand, we have a responsibility to go to the roots of the problems. And the roots are, for instance, when you look at the situation in Greece, not all the roots are outside. Most of the roots are inside, and they are being attacked now. And so I'm much more optimistic if one continues to learn from the mistakes, as Mikhail said, then there is a bright future because the conditions are there, and at least the human capital is there, and that is decisive for getting out of the mess. That's you. Thank you.
So, you know very well that the dimension of the country doesn't have to do with the geographical dimension or the population dimension. It has to do with the dimension of the spirit of young people. Yeah. And Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, dear members of the delegation, thank you very much to be here today with us. It was a great pleasure, and for the students, it was, I think, an excellent seminar and an excellent discussion. And we will meet soon in Luxembourg to discuss about the engineering school. So thank you very much. Now, let's take 5 minutes just to watch a small movie about the riches of the University of Cyprus. So let's sit there to be able to.
Perfect.